Marcus Webb had learned to ignore the pleading eyes. In his line of work, sympathy was a luxury he couldn't afford. As a senior asset recovery specialist for Thornfield Collections, he had repossessed everything from luxury cars to family heirlooms, and after 12 years in the business, he prided himself on his efficiency and emotional detachment. Today's assignment was straightforward: a Baldwin upright piano from a family 3 months behind on their secured loan. The address led him to Riverside, a neighborhood that had seen better days, where cracked sidewalks told stories of municipal budgets stretched too thin and houses wore their age like badges of honor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus pulled his company truck up to 247 Maple Street just after 9 in the morning. The house was a small craftsman-style bungalow with peeling blue paint and a front porch that sagged slightly on one side. The lawn needed mowing, and a child's bicycle lay on its side near the walkway, one wheel still spinning slowly in the morning breeze. He checked the paperwork one more time. The Castellano family. Default amount, $4,782. Collateral, 1 Baldwin upright piano, serial number B447293, valued at approximately $6,000. It was all standard procedure. He had made this drive 1,000 times before to 1,000 different houses, and each one blurred into the next after a while. Marcus grabbed his clipboard and the official notice of repossession, then stepped out of the truck. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of someone's breakfast bacon from a neighboring house. It was the kind of morning that might have felt peaceful under different circumstances, but Marcus had trained himself not to think about circumstances. He had a job to do. The doorbell didn't work, so Marcus knocked firmly on the wooden frame of the screen door. He could hear movement inside, footsteps approaching, then the click of a lock being turned. The door opened to reveal a woman in her mid-30s with tired eyes and dark hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She wore nursing scrubs with cartoon characters on them, and Marcus could see the exhaustion written across her face even through her attempt at a polite smile. "Mrs. Castellano," Marcus said, his voice professionally neutral. "I'm Marcus Webb from Thornfield Collections. I believe you received our notices regarding the secured loan default." The woman's face fell, and her hand tightened on the doorframe. She had known this was coming. They always knew, but knowing and experiencing were two different things. "Please," she said quietly, glancing back into the house. "Can we talk about this? My husband lost his job 4 months ago. He just started a new position last week. We can start making payments again. I have a first payment ready." Marcus had heard variations of this speech hundreds of times. The lost job, the promising new start, the first payment ready to go. Sometimes these stories were true, sometimes they weren't, but the truth didn't matter much in his line of work. The numbers mattered. The contracts mattered. The law mattered. "I understand your situation, Mrs. Castellano, and I'm sorry, but the account is severely delinquent. According to the terms of your loan agreement, the collateral is subject to immediate repossession. I have a court order here." He held up the document, knowing she wouldn't really read it, knowing that the official letterhead and legal language were enough to communicate the finality of the situation. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Marcus recognized that particular brand of dignity, the determination not to break down in front of a stranger. "It's my daughter's piano," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's been playing since she was 4 years old. It was my mother's piano before that. Please, there has to be another way." Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest that he always pushed down and ignored. This was the part of the job that required the most discipline, the moment when someone's life and someone's loss became real and immediate. He had developed strategies over the years. He focused on the paperwork, on the legal rightness of what he was doing, on the fact that he was simply the messenger, not the cause of their problems. "I'm sorry," he repeated, and he meant it in the abstract way that someone means it when they say sorry for your loss to a distant acquaintance. "The piano needs to be removed today. I have a team on standby." You can arrange for personal items to be removed from the piano if there are any sheet music or photographs, but the instrument itself must be collected within the hour. Mrs. Castellano stood frozen for a moment, processing the reality that was crashing down around her. Then she stepped back from the door, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Come in," she said quietly. "Let me get my daughter's things." Marcus entered the house, immediately taking in the modest interior. The living room was clean but worn, with furniture that had clearly been loved for many years. Children's drawings were stuck to the refrigerator visible from the entryway, and school pictures lined the hallway wall. This was a home, not just a house, and that made Marcus's job harder even though he pretended it didn't. The piano stood against the far wall of the living room, a beautiful upright Baldwin in dark mahogany. It was clearly well maintained, the wood polished to a soft sheen despite its age. On top of the piano sat framed photographs, a young girl at various ages sitting at the piano bench, her fingers on the keys, her smile growing more confident in each successive picture. There was sheet music stacked neatly on the music stand, and Marcus could see the worn edges that spoke of frequent use. Mrs. Castellano walked to the piano and gently removed the photographs, handling each one as if it were made of glass. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the sheet music. Marcus stood near the doorway, giving her space but maintaining his presence as policy required. He pulled out his phone to text his moving team that they could head over. "Mama, what's happening?" A small voice came from the hallway. Marcus turned to see a girl of about 8 years old standing in the doorway of what must have been her bedroom. She wore pajamas with stars on them and fuzzy slippers shaped like rabbits. Her dark hair was tangled from sleep, and she clutched a stuffed elephant under one arm. She looked from her mother to Marcus and back again, confusion and fear beginning to dawn on her face. "Lily, go back to your room please," Mrs. Castellano said, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure. "But why is there a man here? Is something wrong with the piano?" The girl, Lily, walked further into the room, her eyes now fixed on Marcus with that direct, unnerving stare that children have when they know something is wrong but don't yet understand what. "Lily, please," her mother repeated, but the girl was already moving toward the piano, toward the sheet music her mother was gathering, toward the instrument that clearly meant something profound to her. "You can't take it," Lily said suddenly, turning to face Marcus with a fierce expression that seemed too large for her small face. "This is my piano. My grandmother gave it to my mama, and my mama let me learn on it. You can't just take it." Marcus had faced angry spouses, crying grandparents, even teenagers who threatened violence, but something about this little girl's direct challenge unsettled him in a way he wasn't prepared for. He cleared his throat and tried to use the same professional tone that usually worked. "I'm sorry, but this piano is collateral for a loan your parents took out. Because the loan hasn't been paid, I have to take the piano. That's how loans work." Even as he said it, he realized how absurd it sounded, trying to explain asset-based lending to an 8-year-old in fuzzy bunny slippers. "That's not fair," Lily said, her voice rising. "We need this piano. I have a recital in 2 weeks. I've been practicing every single day. You can't take it right before my recital." Mrs. Castellano moved toward her daughter, trying to guide her away from the confrontation, but Lily planted her feet. Marcus could see the mother's embarrassment mixing with her own grief, creating a painful cocktail of emotions that played across her face. "Please don't make this harder," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the mother or the daughter or both. "I'm just doing my job. The decision has already been made." "Your job is mean," Lily said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "You take things from people who need them. That's a mean job." Marcus felt something crack in the armor he had so carefully constructed over 12 years of repossessions. This little girl had articulated something he had spent over a decade avoiding, the fundamental truth that his efficiency and professionalism were just elaborate ways of avoiding the human cost of what he did. He was good at his job precisely because he had learned not to think about whether the job itself was good. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Marcus said, falling back on his training. "But this is a legal matter. The law is on my side here." He knew how weak that sounded even as he said it, how hiding behind legality was just another form of emotional cowardice. Lily looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen, of having all his justifications and rationalizations stripped away by the uncompromising gaze of a child who hadn't yet learned to accept injustice as inevitable. "Can I play it one more time?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice shifting from anger to something closer to desperation. "Before you take it away forever, can I please play it one more time?" Marcus glanced at his watch. The moving teen would arrive in about 20 minutes. He should say no. Every manual and training session had taught him not to prolong these situations, not to give people time to become more attached or more emotional. Quick and clean was the company motto. But something in him, some part he thought he had successfully buried years ago, couldn't say no to this request. "You have 10 minutes, he said, surprising himself with his own words. Mrs. Castellano looked at him with an expression of mingled gratitude and sadness. Lily didn't wait for anyone to change their mind. She climbed onto the piano bench, her small frame barely taking up half the seat. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She adjusted her position with the careful precision of someone who had done this thousands of times, her fuzzy slippers barely reaching the pedals. For a moment she just sat there, her hands hovering over the keys, and Marcus realized she was composing herself, preparing for what might be her final performance on this instrument. Then Lily began to play. The first notes were soft and tentative, a simple melody that Marcus didn't recognize. But as she continued, the music began to grow in complexity and emotion. This wasn't a child playing scales or practicing beginner pieces. This was someone who genuinely understood music, who could make an instrument speak in ways that transcended technical skill. Marcus found himself unable to move from his spot near the doorway. He had been in hundreds of homes, seen countless cherished possessions, heard every possible plea and argument, but he had never experienced anything quite like this. The music filled the small living room, transforming it from a space of loss and shame into something else entirely, something that felt almost sacred. The melody was melancholic but not despairing. It spoke of longing and memory, of things cherished and things lost. Marcus didn't know if Lily had chosen this particular piece for its emotional resonance or if she was simply playing something she loved, but the effect was devastating. He could see Mrs. Castellano standing against the far wall, tears now flowing freely down her face, no longer trying to maintain her composure. As Lily played, Marcus became aware of changes in the house around him. A door opened down the hall, and a man appeared, presumably Mr. Castellano, still in the t-shirt and sweatpants he had slept in. He took in the scene immediately, his face registering understanding and resignation. He moved to stand next to his wife, putting his arm around her shoulders. Neither of them said anything. They just listened to their daughter play. The music swelled and ebbed, Lily's small fingers navigating the keys with surprising confidence. Marcus realized he was watching something he had no right to witness, an intimate family moment of grief and goodbye. He felt like an intruder, which of course he was, but for the first time in his career that feeling bothered him in a way he couldn't push aside. The piece built to a crescendo, Lily's entire body now engaged in the performance, swaying slightly with the rhythm, her face a mask of concentration. Then, gradually, the music began to soften again, winding down to a gentle conclusion. The final notes hung in the air of the small living room, and for several seconds after she finished, no one moved or spoke. Lily lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. She didn't turn around to face the room. She just sat there, staring at the piano, memorizing it perhaps, or saying a silent goodbye. Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years, not since he had first started this job and still had the capacity to be moved by other people's pain. It was a sensation in his chest, tight and uncomfortable, like his heart was trying to remember how to feel things he had trained it to ignore. His hand, which had been resting on his clipboard, began to tremble slightly. "That was beautiful, honey," Mrs. Castellano said softly, her voice thick with tears. "Grandma would be so proud of you." Lily finally turned around on the bench, her eyes finding Marcus. There was a question in her gaze, something unspoken but clear. She had done what he asked. She had played her final piece. Now what would he do? Marcus looked down at his clipboard, at the official papers with their legal language and binding contracts. He thought about his job, about his reputation for efficiency, about the 12 years he had spent building a career on his ability to not care about moments exactly like this one. He thought about his boss, Richard Thornfield, who had personally recruited him and who valued him precisely because he got results without getting emotional. The moving teen would be here any minute. Marcus had his phone in his pocket. One text and they would arrive, load up the piano, transport it to the warehouse, and eventually it would be auctioned off to recover a fraction of the defaulted loan amount. Everything would proceed according to policy and procedure. The Castellano family would lose their piano, Marcus would complete another successful repossession, and life would go on. But as Marcus stood there in that small living room, with the echo of Lily's performance still seeming to reverberate in the air, he found himself unable to send that text. He found himself thinking about things he had trained himself not to think about. What had brought him to this career? When had he decided that efficiency mattered more than empathy? At what point had he traded his own humanity for a paycheck and the approval of people like Richard Thornfield? I need to make a phone call, Marcus heard himself say. Everyone in the room looked at him with confused expressions. He walked toward the front door, stepping out onto that sagging porch, pulling out his phone with hands that were definitely shaking now. He stared at his phone screen for a long moment, Richard Thornfield's number right there in his favorites list. This was career suicide. This was going against every protocol and policy. This was choosing emotion over law, sentiment over contract, humanity over efficiency. Everything he had built his professional identity on was about to be compromised by an 8-year-old girl in bunny slippers playing a piano she was about to lose. Marcus took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang 3 times before Richard answered, his voice carrying that particular blend of authority and impatience that Marcus knew so well. Webb, what's the status on the Maple Street collection? Should be wrapped up by now. We have another assignment for you across town this afternoon. Marcus closed his eyes, gathering courage he didn't know he still possessed. Richard, I'm calling about the Castellano piano. I need to discuss alternative arrangements. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a dangerous silence that Marcus recognized as his boss processing something unexpected and unwelcome. Alternative arrangements? Richard's voice had gone cold. Webb, we don't do alternative arrangements. We have a court order. We have a legal right to that collateral. What's the problem? The family has a young daughter. She's quite an accomplished pianist. They're experiencing temporary hardship, but the father just started a new job. I think we should consider a payment plan instead of repossession. Marcus could hear how weak his argument sounded, how much he was grasping at straws. Richard's laugh was harsh and without humor. Are you serious right now? We've sent 3 notices. We've given them every opportunity to work something out. The time for payment plans was 3 months ago. Now the time is for collection. Do your job, Webb. Richard, I really think in this case. Marcus started, but his boss cut him off with the sharp edge of anger. I don't pay you to think about cases, Webb. I pay you to collect assets. That's your job. That's what you're good at. Or at least, that's what you used to be good at. Are you telling me you can't handle this assignment? Because if you can't, I have a dozen other recovery specialists who would love to take your position and your commission. The threat was clear. Marcus had seen Richard fire people for less, had witnessed the ruthless efficiency with which his boss eliminated anyone who showed weakness or sentiment. In the world of asset recovery, compassion was a liability, and Marcus had always understood that. Until now. I can handle it, Marcus said quietly, defeat in his voice. I'll get it done. Good, Richard said, his voice returning to its normal brisk tone. The truck should be there any minute. Get the piano loaded and move on to the next assignment. And Webb, don't call me again unless there's an actual problem, not a sob story. The line went dead. Marcus stood on the porch, phone still pressed to his ear, staring out at the quiet street. A few houses down, someone was mowing their lawn. Across the street, a woman was getting her mail. Life continued on around him, indifferent to the small tragedy playing out at 247 Maple Street. He could hear his truck approaching, the familiar rumble of the company vehicle that had transported hundreds of repossessed items. Marcus turned to look through the screen door into the living room. Lily was still sitting at the piano, her hands resting on the keys but not playing. Her parents stood together near the hallway, holding each other. They all looked like people waiting for an execution. The truck pulled up behind Marcus's vehicle, and two men got out. Tony and James, part of the regular moving crew Marcus worked with. Good guys who didn't ask questions and did their jobs efficiently. They had loaded everything from grand pianos to antique furniture, and they approached every job with professional detachment. They nodded at Marcus as they opened the back of the truck and pulled out the necessary equipment. "Ready when you are, boss," Tony called out, pulling on his work gloves. Marcus nodded mechanically and walked back into the house. The Castellano family looked up at him with expressions of resignation. This was it. The moment of actual loss, when the theoretical became concrete, when the thing they had been dreading finally arrived. "Lily, come away from the piano now," Mrs. Castellano said gently. The little girl slid off the bench slowly, reluctantly, as if leaving the piano meant leaving a part of herself behind. She walked to her parents, and her mother pulled her close. Marcus gestured to Tony and James, who entered the house with the rolling dolly and furniture straps. They were professional and efficient, assessing the piano quickly, determining the best way to navigate it through the door. Marcus had seen this process hundreds of times. It usually took about 15 minutes from start to finish. But as Tony and James began positioning the piano for movement, Marcus found himself unable to look away from Lily's face. The little girl was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks, her hands clutching her mother's scrubs. She wasn't throwing a tantrum or making a scene. She was just heartbroken, and that somehow made it worse. Something inside Marcus broke. It wasn't a dramatic moment or a sudden revelation. It was more like a dam that had been slowly cracking, finally giving way. 12 years of accumulated weight, of ignored conscience, of suppressed humanity, all came flooding through at once. He thought about his own childhood, about the piano lessons his mother had insisted he take, lessons he had resented at the time but that had given him one of his few good memories from those difficult years. He thought about the moment his father had sold his mother's piano after she died, how Marcus had been 12 years old and had begged him not to, how his father had done it anyway because he needed the money for things that seemed more important than a dead woman's instrument. Marcus had spent his adult life becoming the person he had hated when he was 12 years old. He had become his father, taking away things that mattered because of debts and laws and procedures. He had become the person who chose efficiency over empathy, who valued policy over people. And standing in this living room, watching this family lose something precious, Marcus realized he couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't be that person for one more day, one more hour, one more minute. "Stop," Marcus said. His voice was quiet but firm. Tony and James, who had just gotten the piano position on the dolly, looked up in confusion. "What?" Tony asked. "Boss, we're ready to go. We need to stop." Marcus said more loudly. "We're not taking the piano." The room froze. Everyone stared at Marcus like he had just announced he could fly or had discovered the meaning of life. Mrs. Castellano's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Mr. Castellano straightened up, his arm still around his wife. Lily wiped her eyes, confusion replacing despair on her face. "Boss," James said carefully, like he was talking to someone who might be having a mental breakdown. "We have the court order. We have to take it. That's the job." "I said we're not taking it," Marcus repeated. He pulled out his phone and opened his banking app, his hands still trembling but moving with purpose now. "How much is the first payment?" he asked, turning to Mrs. Castellano. "What?" She looked completely bewildered. "The payment, how much do you owe monthly on this loan?" I don't know exactly, she stammered. Around $400, I think. Marcus nodded and began transferring money from his personal savings account to his checking account. I'm making the payment myself. The loan is no longer in default. We have no legal basis for repossession. You can't do that, Tony said, genuine concern in his voice now. Man, Thornfield will fire you. He'll probably sue you. You can't just pay off people's debts. I'm not paying off the debt, Marcus said as he navigated through the screens on his banking app. I'm making one payment to bring the account current. That's all. That gives them time to catch up, to work out a real payment plan with the company. He finished the transfer and then called the Thornfield Collections main line. When the receptionist answered, he asked for the accounting department. What are you doing? Mr. Castellano asked, his voice full of disbelief. Making sure this gets documented, Marcus replied. The accounting clerk came on the line, and Marcus identified himself. I'm calling to report a payment on account number 7347. The Castellano secured loan. I'm paying the next scheduled payment of $412 from my personal funds. Please note in the system that the account is current as of today. There was confusion on the other end of the line, questions about protocol and authorization. Marcus answered everything mechanically, pushing through the bureaucracy with the same efficiency he had always used to enforce it. Finally, reluctantly, the clerk agreed to process the payment and update the account status. When Marcus hung up, the living room was completely silent except for the ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. Tony and James stood next to the piano on its dolly, looking at each other and then at Marcus like he had lost his mind. The Castellano family stood frozen, afraid to believe what seemed to be happening. The account is current, Marcus said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. There's no legal basis for repossession at this time. He turned to Tony and James. Put the piano back. We're done here. Tony opened his mouth to argue, but something in Marcus's expression stopped him. He looked at James, shrugged, and they began carefully maneuvering the piano back into its original position against the wall. The whole process took only a few minutes, but it felt like time had slowed down, like everyone in the room was moving through molasses. When the piano was back in place and Tony and James had packed up their equipment, they headed for the door. Boss, Tony said quietly as he passed Marcus. I hope you know what you're doing. I really do, Marcus replied, though he wasn't sure he knew anything anymore except that for the first time in 12 years, he felt like he had done something right. After the moving truck pulled away, Marcus turned to face the Castellano family. They were still standing together in a tight cluster, like people who had witnessed a miracle and weren't sure if they were allowed to believe in it yet. I don't understand, Mrs. Castellano finally said. Why did you do that? You don't even know us. Marcus didn't have a good answer for that question. He wasn't sure he understood it himself. All he knew was that something in him had changed in the space between Lily's performance and his phone call with Richard Thornfield. Some wall he had built around himself had crumbled, and he wasn't sure he could or wanted to rebuild it. Because it was the right thing to do, Marcus said simply. And because I've spent too many years doing the wrong things for the right reasons. He looked at Lily, who was staring at him with an expression of awe and gratitude that made his chest tight again. You're a talented pianist. You shouldn't lose your instrument because of adult problems with money and debt. Thank you, Lily said softly. It was the first thing she had said since her request to play one final time. Thank you so much. We can't accept this, Mr. Castellano said, though his voice was uncertain, torn between pride and desperate relief. We can't let you pay our debt. You're not, Marcus replied. I paid one installment to bring the account current. You still owe the money. You'll still need to make payments. But now you have time to do that without losing something irreplaceable. He pulled out one of his business cards and wrote a number on the back. This is the direct line to the accounting department. Call them tomorrow and work out a payment plan. They'll work with you now that the account isn't in default. Mrs. Castellano took the card with shaking hands. I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say, Marcus replied. He picked up his clipboard and headed toward the door, suddenly desperate to leave before the full weight of what he had just done caught up with him. "Wait," Lily called out. She ran to him and threw her arms around his waist, hugging him with the unself-conscious intensity of childhood. "You're a good person," she said into his shirt. "You saved my piano." Marcus stood awkwardly for a moment, not sure what to do with his hands or his emotions. Finally, he patted Lily's shoulder gently. "Keep practicing," he said. "And work hard for that recital." She pulled back and looked up at him, nodding seriously. "I will. I promise I will." Marcus left the house and walked to his truck, aware of the family watching him from the doorway. He climbed into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Richard Thornfield. "Status on Maple Street collection?" Marcus stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed out a reply. "Piano repossessed successfully. Account closed." It was a lie. Marcus had never lied to Richard before. But the truth, that he had paid off a client's debt and let the collateral remain with the family, would result in immediate termination and possibly legal action. So Marcus lied, buying himself time to figure out what he was going to do next. He started the truck and pulled away from 247 Maple Street, watching the house disappear in his rearview mirror. Marcus had no idea what the consequences of his actions would be. He had probably destroyed his career. He had certainly compromised his professional reputation. Richard Thornfield would eventually discover what had happened, and when he did, Marcus would pay the price. But as he drove through the streets of Riverside, heading toward his next assignment, Marcus realized something surprising. He didn't care. For the first time in 12 years, he had acted like a human being instead of a collection machine. He had chosen compassion over efficiency, people over policy. And whatever the cost, it was worth it to not be the man who took a little girl's piano away from her. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Marcus's windshield as he sat in the parking lot of a convenience store 3 blocks from his next assignment. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The adrenaline from what he had done at the Castellano house was beginning to wear off, replaced by a creeping sense of dread about the inevitable consequences. Marcus had built his entire adult life on reliability and detachment. He was the person Richard Thornfield called when a situation required absolute professionalism, when emotion could not be allowed to interfere with business. He had been that person for so long that he had forgotten there was anyone else inside him. But Lily's performance had cracked something open, and now Marcus couldn't seem to close it again. His phone buzzed repeatedly with assignment updates and messages from the dispatch office. There were 3 more collections scheduled for today, each one representing someone else's financial failure, someone else's loss. Marcus stared at the list of addresses and felt physically sick. He had done this exact thing hundreds of times without a second thought, moving from house to house like a machine programmed to extract value regardless of human cost. The next address belonged to the Morrison family. According to the file, they were defaulting on a loan secured by a commercial-grade espresso machine. The business had failed, and now the equipment had to be recovered. Simple. Straightforward. Routine. But Marcus found himself unable to start the truck, unable to drive to that address and do it all over again. He thought about calling in sick, but that would only delay the inevitable. The assignments would still be there tomorrow. The debts would still exist. The legal machinery of collections and repossessions would continue grinding forward whether Marcus participated or not. One act of mercy at the Castellano house hadn't changed the fundamental nature of his work or the system he served. Marcus finally forced himself to start the truck and drive to the Morrison address. It was a small commercial space in a strip mall, wedged between a nail salon and a vacant storefront with soap still coating the windows. The coffee shop had been called Rising Grounds, and Marcus could see through the window that most of the furniture and equipment had already been removed. Only the espresso machine remained, sitting like a monument to failed dreams in the otherwise empty space. A man in his 50s was inside, boxing up the last few items from behind the counter. He looked up when Marcus knocked on the glass door, and his shoulders sagged with recognition. He knew why Marcus was there. He unlocked the door and pushed it open without saying anything. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus began, but the man held up a hand to stop him. "I know who you are and why you're here. Just take it and go. I don't have the energy to fight anymore." The defeat in his voice was absolute. This wasn't anger or desperation. This was exhaustion, the voice of someone who had already accepted loss and just wanted it to be over. Marcus looked at the espresso machine, a top-of-the-line Italian model that had probably cost close to $20,000 when it was new. Mr. Morrison had likely imagined it as the centerpiece of a thriving business, the tool that would help him build something meaningful. Instead, it had become just another asset to be liquidated. "How long were you open?" Marcus found himself asking, even though it wasn't relevant to his job and he had no real reason to prolong the conversation. 14 months, Mr. Morrison replied, still boxing up coffee cups printed with the Rising Grounds logo. "We made it through the first year, barely. But the rent kept going up and the big chain opened up 2 blocks away. Nobody wants to pay $6 for a handcrafted pour-over when they can get a large coffee for $2.50 at the drive-thru." Marcus nodded, thinking about all the small businesses that had failed for similar reasons, how the economic system seemed designed to favor the already large and established. It wasn't fair, but fairness had never been part of his job description. "I'm sorry it didn't work out," Marcus said, and this time he really meant it. Mr. Morrison looked at him with an expression that might have been surprise or might have been bitterness. It was hard to tell. "Are you? Because you seem to be doing just fine in your line of work. Taking things from people who can't fight back, that's probably pretty steady employment." The words stung because they were true. Marcus had never gone hungry or worried about making rent because his income depended on other people's financial suffering. The worse the economy got, the more repossessions there were, the more money he made. "You're right," Marcus said quietly. "I have been doing just fine. But that doesn't mean I feel good about it." Mr. Morrison studied him for a moment, seeming to reassess. Then he shrugged and went back to his packing. "Doesn't matter how you feel about it. The machine still has to go. My loan still has to be paid. Life still moves forward whether we feel good about it or not." Tony and James arrived a few minutes later, and the espresso machine was loaded onto the truck with professional efficiency. Mr. Morrison watched from inside the empty shop, his expression blank. When it was done, Marcus handed him the official receipt documenting the repossession. The man took it without looking at it and set it on the counter next to a stack of unused Rising Grounds loyalty cards. "For what it's worth," Marcus said from the doorway, "I think the big chains are making the world a worse place. Your coffee shop probably meant something to the people who came here. That counts for something." "It counts for nothing when you can't pay your bills," Mr. Morrison replied. "But thanks for saying it anyway." Marcus left the failed coffee shop feeling worse than he had after the Castellano house. At least there he had been able to do something, to make a difference even if it was small and probably futile in the long run. Here, he had simply gone through the motions, playing his assigned role in the economic machine that crushed small dreams to feed larger appetites. The rest of the day passed in a blur of similar encounters. A young couple losing furniture they had bought for their first apartment. An elderly widow having her late husband's tools repossessed because she couldn't keep up with the loan payments. A single father watching his truck get loaded onto a flatbed because he had missed 3 payments after his hours got cut at work. Each situation was different in its details but identical in its fundamental sadness. By the time Marcus returned to the Thornfield Collections office at the end of the day, he felt hollowed out and exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. The office was in a nondescript building on the edge of the industrial district, surrounded by warehouses and distribution centers. It was the kind of place that people passed without noticing, which was exactly how Richard Thornfield liked it. Marcus filed his paperwork mechanically, documenting each repossession with the detailed notes that Richard demanded. When he got to the Castellano file, he hesitated. The lie he had texted earlier in the day was now going to become part of the official record. He wrote that the piano had been successfully repossessed and transported to the warehouse for auction. He noted the condition of the instrument and estimated its sale value. Every word was fiction, but his handwriting remained steady. "Webb, good work today." Richard Thornfield appeared beside Marcus's desk, moving with the silent efficiency of someone who enjoyed startling his employees. Richard was in his late 50s, lean and sharp-featured, always dressed in expensive suits that communicated both his success and his superiority. He ran Thornfield Collections like a military operation, demanding absolute obedience and rewarding results without regard for methods. "Thank you," Marcus replied, continuing to write his false report. "I saw the Maple Street collection came through without issues. I thought that one might give you trouble, what with the kid and all." Richard picked up the file Marcus had just completed and scanned it with practiced eyes. "Piano's in good condition. Should fetch decent money at auction." Marcus felt his stomach tighten but kept his expression neutral. "Should cover most of the outstanding debt." "Good, good." Richard set the file down and leaned against Marcus's desk. "You know, Webb, you're one of my best recovery specialists. You've got that rare combination of efficiency and emotional detachment. Most people can't handle this work. They get too wrapped up in the sob stories. But you understand that business is business." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He thought about Lily playing that final song, about her tears when the moving crew had arrived, about the way her face had transformed from despair to hope when Marcus had changed his mind. Richard Thornfield would never understand any of that because he had systematically trained himself not to understand it. "I've got a special assignment for you next week," Richard continued. "Big one. Commercial property foreclosure, full building contents. The owner is apparently quite emotional about it, made some threats actually. I need someone who can handle difficult personalities without backing down. You interested?" Marcus looked up at his boss, at the man he had modeled his professional identity after for 12 years. Richard Thornfield was successful and respected in his industry. He lived in a large house, drove an expensive car, took luxurious vacations. He had achieved everything that American capitalism promised to those who worked hard and played by the rules. And he had done it by becoming someone who could look at human suffering and see only business opportunities. "Can I think about it?" Marcus asked. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Think about it? It's a high-value assignment, Webb. Premium commission. Most of my people would jump at this opportunity. I understand. I just need a day to check my schedule." Marcus knew it was a weak excuse, but he couldn't commit to anything right now. The foundation of his professional life was crumbling, and he needed time to figure out what that meant. Richard studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that his boss could sense something had changed, that some crucial element of Marcus's reliability had been compromised. "Fine, you've got until tomorrow morning. But don't overthink it, Webb. This is a straightforward job. The kind of thing you've done 100 times before." After Richard walked away, Marcus finished his paperwork and prepared to leave. The office was emptying out as other recovery specialists completed their shifts. Marcus normally enjoyed this time of day, the sense of work accomplished and duties fulfilled. But today he felt only a deep unease, like he was waiting for something terrible to happen. His phone rang as he was walking to his truck. Unknown number. Marcus almost didn't answer, but something made him press the green button. "Hello? Is this Marcus Webb?" The voice was female, young, uncertain. "This is he. Can I help you?" "This is Emily Morrison. You were at my dad's coffee shop today." Marcus stopped walking, keys dangling from his hand. He remembered Mr. Morrison mentioning a daughter who had helped design the shop's logo, but she hadn't been there during the repossession. "Yes, I remember. I'm calling because I want you to know what you did today. What you've been doing." Emily's voice was shaking with anger and grief. "That coffee shop was my dad's dream. He saved for 15 years to open it. He worked 70-hour weeks trying to make it succeed. and you just walked in and took away the one piece of equipment that might have given him a chance to start over. Marcus had no defense because she was absolutely right. "I'm sorry," was all he could say. "Sorry?" Emily's voice rose. "You're sorry? Do you have any idea what this is doing to him? He's been sitting in his car for 3 hours, just sitting there because he can't face coming home and telling my mom that it's really over. He's been so strong through everything, and now he's broken. And you're sorry?" Marcus felt each word like a physical blow. "I understand you're angry." Angry doesn't even begin to cover it, she cut him off. "You people, you collection companies, you're vultures. You profit from other people's worst moments. You take things that matter and turn them into dollar signs. And you do it all legally, which somehow makes it worse because we can't even fight back. What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to feel bad about it," Emily said. "I want you to lie awake tonight thinking about what you did. I want you to imagine someone taking away something you care about and telling you it's just business. I want you to be human for 5 minutes instead of whatever you've turned yourself into." The line went dead. Marcus stood in the parking lot, phone still pressed to his ear, feeling like he had been punched in the chest. Emily Morrison had articulated something that had been growing inside him all day. He had turned himself into something less than human, had traded his capacity for empathy for financial security and professional success. Marcus drove home on autopilot, barely aware of the traffic or the route. He lived in a nice apartment complex on the north side of the city, the kind of place with a gym and a pool and gated parking. It was the sort of home that announced its resident had made it, had achieved a comfortable middle-class stability. Marcus had always been proud of this apartment, had seen it as evidence of his professional success. But as he walked through the door that evening, the space felt hollow and cold. The furniture was expensive but impersonal. The walls were bare except for a few generic prints he had bought because they matched the color scheme. There were no photographs, no personal mementos, nothing that suggested an actual human lived here rather than just stayed between work shifts. Marcus had moved into this apartment 8 years ago after his divorce. His wife, Jennifer, had left him because she said he had become someone she didn't recognize, someone who cared more about his career than about people. He had dismissed her concerns at the time, had told himself she simply didn't understand the demands of his profession. But standing in his empty apartment, Marcus wondered if Jennifer had seen something he had been unwilling to acknowledge. He opened his laptop and began searching for information about the Castellano family. It took some time, but he eventually found Mrs. Castellano's social media profile. It was set to private, but her profile picture showed her in her nursing scrubs, smiling tiredly at the camera. Her header image was a photo of Lily at the piano, her small hands stretched across the keys, her expression serious and focused. Marcus clicked through to find Lily's recital information. Sure enough, there was a public event page for the Riverside Community Center's spring recital, scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Lily Castellano was listed among the performers, along with 24 other young musicians from the area. The event was free and open to the public. He stared at the event page for a long time, thinking about what would have happened if he had followed through with the repossession. Lily wouldn't be performing at that recital. She would be just another child whose dreams had been cut short by adult problems with money and debt. And Marcus would have been the instrument of that loss, the person who made it happen. His phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the Thornfield Collections Accounting Department, a routine end-of-day summary of transactions. Marcus scrolled through the list and stopped when he saw his payment for the Castellano loan. It had been processed and applied to the account as a standard payment from the borrower. There was nothing in the system to indicate that Marcus had paid it himself, nothing to trigger any red flags or investigations. He had gotten away with it, at least for now. But Marcus knew that Richard Thornfield was thorough and detail-oriented. Eventually, probably within the next week or two, someone would notice the discrepancy. When they traced the payment back to Marcus's personal bank account, there would be questions. And then there would be consequences. Marcus thought about running, just packing up and leaving town before anyone figured out what he had done. He had enough savings to start over somewhere else, to find a different job in a different city where no one knew his history. But running felt like cowardice, and more importantly, it felt like abandoning the small act of resistance he had begun. Instead, Marcus opened a new document on his laptop and began to write. He wasn't sure what it was at first, just words pouring out about his day, about Lily and the piano, about Mr. Morrison and his failed coffee shop, about Emily Morrison's phone call. But as he wrote, it began to take shape as something more intentional. A confession. An explanation. An attempt to articulate why he had done what he did and what it meant. He wrote about his 12 years in asset recovery, about the hundreds of repossessions he had conducted, about the emotional armor he had built to protect himself from the human cost of his work. He wrote about the moment when Lily had asked to play the piano one last time, about how her performance had cracked that armor open. He wrote about the realization that he had been lying to himself for years, pretending that legal and moral were the same thing. Marcus wrote until after midnight, filling page after page with thoughts he had suppressed for over a decade. When he finally stopped, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, he had created something that was part memoir, part confession, part manifesto. He saved the document with a simple title, The Cost of Collection. He went to bed but couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces. Lily crying as the movers approached her piano. Mr. Morrison standing in his empty coffee shop. The elderly widow signing papers for her late husband's repossessed tools. The young couple watching their furniture being loaded onto a truck. Dozens of other faces from years of repossessions, people he had trained himself not to see as fully human because seeing them that way would have made his job impossible. Around 3 a.m, Marcus gave up on sleep and went to sit on his balcony. The city stretched out before him, thousands of lit windows representing thousands of lives. How many of those homes contained people struggling with debt? How many families were one missed payment away from losing something precious? And how many people like Marcus were out there, enforcing the rules of a system that valued property over people? His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Tony, one of the movers from earlier. "Hey boss, heard a weird rumor. Someone said you paid off that piano family's debt yourself. Tell me that's not true." Marcus stared at the message, his heart racing. Word was already spreading. He should have known that Tony and James would talk, that a story that unusual would make the rounds among the moving crews and recovery specialists. His lie to Richard Thornfield had bought him maybe 24 hours before the truth came out. He typed and deleted several responses before finally settling on something non-committal. Don't believe everything you hear. Focus on your own work. But even as he sent it, Marcus knew it was too late. The truth had its own momentum now, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The next morning, Marcus drove to the office with a sense of grim determination. He had made his decision during the sleepless hours before dawn. He wasn't going to lie anymore. He wasn't going to run. When Richard Thornfield confronted him about the Castellano payment, Marcus would tell him the truth. And then he would accept whatever consequences followed. The office was busy when Marcus arrived, people moving between desks and filing cabinets with the purposeful energy of a workday beginning. But Marcus noticed something different in how people looked at him. There were whispers and sidelong glances. Tony's rumor had clearly spread beyond the moving crew. Marcus barely had time to set down his coffee before Richard Thornfield appeared at his desk, his expression harder than Marcus had ever seen it. "My office. Now." The words were clipped and cold. Marcus followed his boss through the maze of cubicles to the corner office with windows overlooking the industrial district. Richard closed the door firmly and turned to face Marcus with his arms crossed. "I got an interesting call this morning from accounting. They were doing a routine audit and found something unusual about the Castellano payment." Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. "Would you like to explain why a payment on that account came from your personal bank account?" Marcus had rehearsed this moment in his mind a dozen times during the sleepless night, but now that it was actually happening, all his prepared speeches evaporated. He met Richard's eyes and spoke simply. "Because I didn't want to take that little girl's piano away from her." The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard's face went through several expressions: disbelief, anger, contempt, before settling on something that looked almost like pity. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Richard finally said. "Do you understand the position you've put this company in? You falsified a repossession report. You used company resources under false pretenses. You interfered with a legal collection action." "I made a payment on behalf of a client to bring their account current," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady. "That's not illegal." "What's illegal is fraud," Richard shot back. "You lied on official documents. You deceived your employer. And worst of all, you let your emotions override your professional judgment. That's something I never thought I'd see from you, Webb." "Maybe that's the problem," Marcus said, surprising himself with his own boldness. "Maybe I've spent too long ignoring my emotions, pretending that legal and right are the same thing." Richard stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "What the hell has gotten into you? You were one of my best people. Reliable, efficient, professional. Now you're spouting philosophy and throwing away your career over some kid's piano?" "That kid is an incredibly talented musician who would have lost her instrument because her family hit a rough patch," Marcus said, feeling anger rise in his chest. "Her father just started a new job. They can make the payments now. All they needed was a little time and a little mercy. Neither of which are part of our business model." "Mercy isn't part of any business model," Richard said sharply. "Business is about contracts and obligations. It's about people keeping their word and facing consequences when they don't. The moment you start making exceptions based on feelings, the whole system falls apart. And what kind of system is it that destroys people for being human?" Marcus shot back. "What kind of work have we been doing all these years, Richard? We take things from people at their lowest moments. We profit from their suffering. And we call it professionalism." Richard's expression shifted from anger to something colder and more final. "I think you need to take some time off, Webb. Clear your head. Figure out if you actually want to work in this industry. Because right now, you sound like someone who doesn't belong here anymore." "Maybe I don't," Marcus said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, and Marcus realized he meant them completely. Maybe he had never belonged in this industry, had never been suited for work that required checking his humanity at the door. "Fine," Richard said after a long pause. "You're suspended without pay pending a full investigation into your conduct. If we determine you've violated company policy, which you clearly have, you'll be terminated and we'll pursue legal action to recover our losses. Do you understand?" "I understand," Marcus replied. He stood up to leave, feeling strangely light despite the weight of what had just happened. As he reached the door, Richard called out one more time. "Was it worth it, Webb? Throwing away 12 years of career advancement, your reputation, your income, all for one family's piano?" Marcus turned back to face his former boss. "Yes," he said simply. "It was absolutely worth it." He walked out of Richard Thornfield's office and through the maze of cubicles toward the exit. His former colleagues watched him go, some with sympathy, others with judgment, most with confusion. Marcus didn't care what any of them thought. For the first time in years, he felt like himself, like a person who could look in the mirror without flinching. Outside in the parking lot, Marcus sat in his truck and let the reality of his situation sink in. He was unemployed. He would probably be sued by his former employer. His reputation in the asset recovery industry was destroyed. His carefully constructed professional life had collapsed in less than 24 hours. And somehow, despite all of that, Marcus felt more at peace than he had in years. His phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Webb? This is Sandra Castellano. We need to talk." Marcus gripped the phone tighter, his heart racing. "Mrs. Castellano's voice sounded strained, and he immediately feared the worst. Had something happened with the payment? Had Richard found a way to reverse it? "Mr. Webb, I just heard what happened to you." A friend of mine works in your office building, and word spreads fast in small communities. You lost your job because of what you did for us." Sandra's voice cracked slightly. "We can't let you sacrifice everything for our family. We're going to figure out a way to pay you back." Marcus leaned back against his truck, watching clouds drift across the morning sky. "Mrs. Castellano, you don't owe me anything beyond the regular loan payments. What I did was my choice. It had nothing to do with expecting repayment. But you're unemployed now. You used your own money. This isn't right." Sandra sounded close to tears. "My husband and I talked all night. We can sell some things, maybe take extra shifts. We'll find a way to give you back what you spent." "Please don't do that," Marcus said firmly but gently. "Your family needs that money more than I do. I have savings. I'll be fine. What matters is that Lily gets to keep playing, that she gets to perform at her recital." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Sandra spoke again, her voice thick with emotion. "Why did you really do it? You don't know us. You could have just taken the piano and moved on like you probably did hundreds of times before." Marcus thought about how to answer that question. "Because I saw myself 12 years ago, watching my father sell my mother's piano after she died. I begged him not to do it, but he needed the money and I was just a kid who couldn't stop him. I've spent my whole adult life being the person I hated when I was 12. Yesterday, I finally had a chance to be someone different." Sandra was quiet for several seconds. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I'm sorry our situation put you in this position." "You didn't put me anywhere," Marcus replied. "I put myself there by choosing a career that required me to stop seeing people as people. What happened at your house just helped me realize what I'd become. If anything, your family did me a favor." "Well," Sandra said, her voice stronger now, "I want you to know something. Lily hasn't stopped talking about you. She keeps saying you're a hero, that you saved her piano. She wants you to come to her recital. We all do. Actually, that's the real reason I'm calling." Marcus felt warmth spread through his chest. "I'd be honored to come. When is it again?" 2 weeks from Saturday at the Riverside Community Center. 7 o'clock. Sandra paused. "And Mr. Webb, whatever happens with your job situation, whatever comes next for you, please know that you made a real difference in our lives. That matters more than you probably realize." After they hung up, Marcus sat in his truck for a long time, processing everything that had happened in less than 24 hours. He had destroyed his career, would probably face legal consequences, and had no clear plan for the future. But he also felt more alive and authentic than he had in over a decade. The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of uncertainty and unexpected possibility. Richard Thornfield did indeed pursue legal action, filing a lawsuit against Marcus for breach of contract and fraudulent misrepresentation. The case would take months to resolve, but Marcus's lawyer thought they had a reasonable defense. After all, Marcus had brought the account current with a legitimate payment. The falsified report was more serious, but even that had gray areas. More surprisingly, Marcus's story began to spread beyond the small world of asset recovery. Emily Morrison, the coffee shop owner's daughter, had heard about what happened and wrote a blog post that went viral. The story of a debt collector who chose conscience over career resonated with thousands of people who had their own experiences with the brutal machinery of collections and repossessions. Local news picked up the story, and suddenly Marcus found himself being interviewed about his decision. He was uncomfortable with the attention, but he used the platform to talk about the human cost of an economic system that treated people as nothing more than their ability to pay debts. He talked about the families he had hurt over the years, the dreams he had helped destroy in the name of legal contracts and professional obligation. The publicity brought unexpected consequences. A local nonprofit that helped families facing financial hardship reached out to Marcus. They needed someone who understood the collection industry from the inside, someone who could help develop better intervention strategies. The pay would be less than half what he had made at Thornfield Collections, but the work would involve helping people rather than taking from them. Marcus accepted the position immediately. For the first time in his adult life, he would be using his skills and knowledge to protect people instead of targeting them. It felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in years. On the evening of Lily's recital, Marcus arrived at the Riverside Community Center 30 minutes early. The building was modest, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and folding chairs arranged in neat rows. Families were already gathering, parents helping young performers with last-minute adjustments to clothes and sheet music. He spotted the Castellano family near the front. Lily wore a deep blue dress that matched her eyes, her hair pulled back with small clips that sparkled under the lights. When she saw Marcus, her face lit up with pure joy. She ran over and hugged him without hesitation. "You came. I was worried you might not be able to make it." Lily looked up at him with that same direct gaze that had undone him 2 weeks ago. "I told everyone at school about you. About how you're a real-life hero." "I'm not a hero," Marcus said, embarrassed by the description. "I just did what any decent person should have done." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," Sandra said, approaching with her husband. "Most people don't do what they should. They do what's easy or profitable or safe. You chose differently." Marcus shook hands with Mr. Castellano, who gripped his hand firmly. "I got my first paycheck from the new job," he said quietly. "We made the payment to the loan company. We're going to be okay now. Thank you for giving us the chance to prove that." The recital began shortly after 7. There were performances of varying skill levels, from beginners carefully picking out simple melodies to more advanced students tackling challenging classical pieces. Parents applauded enthusiastically for each performer, creating an atmosphere of support and celebration. When Lily's name was called, Marcus felt his heart rate increase as if he were the one about to perform. She walked to the piano with quiet confidence, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. Then she turned to face the audience. "I'd like to dedicate this performance to Mr. Marcus Webb, who taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose kindness over rules." Lily's voice was clear and strong, and Marcus felt his eyes burning with unshed tears. She began to play, and Marcus recognized the piece immediately. It was the same melody she had performed that morning in her living room, the song that had changed everything. But this time, Lily played it with even more depth and emotion. She had poured her gratitude, her relief, her hope into every note. The audience was completely silent as Lily played, drawn into the story the music told. Marcus watched her small hands move across the keys with grace and confidence, and he thought about how close she had come to losing this. How one person's choice, one moment of compassion, had preserved not just an instrument but a child's ability to express herself, to pursue her passion, to become whoever she was meant to be. When Lily finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood, not just her family but strangers who recognized they had witnessed something special. Lily stood and bowed, then looked directly at Marcus and smiled. After the recital, families gathered in the community center's small reception area for cookies and punch. Marcus found himself surrounded by people who wanted to thank him or tell him their own stories of struggling with debt and collections. He listened to each person, really listened in a way he had trained himself not to do during his years at Thornfield Collections. Mr. Morrison, the coffee shop owner, approached with his daughter Emily. "I wanted to thank you," he said simply. "Not just for what you did for the Castellano family, but for what you said in those interviews. About how the system is broken. About how we need to find ways to help people instead of just punishing them for being unable to pay." "I should be thanking you," Marcus replied. "Your daughter's phone call helped wake me up to what I had become." Emily smiled slightly. "I was pretty angry that night. But I'm glad something good came from it. My dad is starting over, working with a cooperative business model this time. Other small business owners are helping him get back on his feet." As the evening wound down and families began to leave, Marcus helped the Castellanos pack up Lily's sheet music and carry her things to their car. The night air was cool and clear, full of promise. "What will you do now?" Sandra asked as they reached the parking lot. Marcus thought about his new job, about the chance to use his knowledge of the collection industry to protect people rather than harm them. He thought about the blog he had started, sharing stories of people caught in debt traps and exploring alternatives to the current system. He thought about how much lighter he felt now that he had stopped carrying the weight of all those repossessions. "I'm going to try to make things better," he said. "In whatever small ways I can. One family at a time if that's all I can manage." "That's all any of us can do," Sandra replied. "Just try to make things a little better than we found them." Lily yawned, exhausted from the excitement of the evening. Marcus knelt down to her level. "You played beautifully tonight. Your grandmother would be very proud of you." "She is proud of me," Lily said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "She told me so. She watches from heaven, and she sent you to help us when we needed it most." Marcus didn't believe in that kind of divine intervention, but he didn't say so. Maybe there was something larger at work, or maybe it was just the accumulation of small human choices, moments when people decided to be kind instead of cruel, generous instead of selfish. Either way, the result was the same. Connection. Healing. Hope. As Marcus drove home that night, he thought about the cost of his decision and what he had gained in return. He had lost a career built on efficiency and emotional detachment. He had gained a sense of purpose and a clear conscience. The trade was more than fair. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of Lily at the piano, her face radiant with joy as she played. Underneath, Sandra had written a simple message that meant everything. "Thank you for seeing us as people instead of numbers. Thank you for choosing compassion. Thank you for being brave enough to change." Marcus saved the photo and placed his phone on the passenger seat. Tomorrow he would start his new job, begin the work of helping families navigate financial crisis without losing everything they valued. The road ahead would be challenging, probably frustrating at times, definitely less lucrative than his previous career. But it would be honest work. It would be meaningful work. It would be the kind of work that let him sleep at night and look at himself in the mirror without flinching. And that, Marcus had finally learned, was worth more than any amount of professional success built on other people's suffering. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.